The silver warning. Why face value? Coins keep confusing buyers. Bullion versus 90% silver. The silver warning. Why are coins stamped with just $1 when they're actually worth 20, 25, even 30 times more? Is it just metal pricing or something deeper most buyers never notice? Because right now, first-time silver buyers are walking into shops, seeing that tiny face value, and walking out believing the system is hiding the truth. But here's what almost nobody tells you. That tiny number on the coin can completely change how you trade, how you store, and how your silver actually works in a crisis. And in one real showroom conversation, a buyer started with a big silver bar and walked out with something totally different. Why? Stay with me. Because the reason will change how you see silver forever. He first noticed the confusion in a place where money was supposed to be clear. It was not in a bank. It was not in a classroom. It was inside a small precious metals showroom where buyers came to exchange paper currency for physical silver. A first-time buyer stood at the counter holding a government-minted silver coin. She turned it slowly under the light, studying the surface. The design was detailed and official. The edges were clean. The weight felt serious in her hand. But her eyes stopped at one tiny detail stamped near the rim. $1. She looked up at the dealer. The price tag next to the coin said nearly 30 times that amount. Her expression changed from curiosity to suspicion. She asked the question many new buyers ask, but few say directly. If it says $1, why does it cost so much more? The dealer gave the usual explanation about silver value, market price, and metal content, but the buyer was no longer listening carefully. Her mind had already moved somewhere else. To her, the number on the coin and the price on the label did not match, and when numbers do not match, trust begins to weaken. This moment happens quietly every day in bullion shops across the world. It appears small, it appears technical, but in reality, it reveals something deeper about how modern markets understand money and how easily that understanding can fracture. The coin in her hand was not unusual. It was a standard sovereign bullion coin, 1 ounce of fine silver minted by a national government, carrying legal tender status. The denomination stamped on it, $1, was required by law. It existed so the coin could be classified as currency rather than a generic metal object. But the buyer did not see legal classification. She saw contradiction. The contradiction is simple. The number stamped on the coin does not represent its real purchasing power. The metal inside the coin determines value, not the denomination. Yet the denomination is the only number physically printed on the surface. To a new observer, this creates a powerful illusion. The illusion is that someone, somewhere, is misrepresenting value. This misunderstanding does not begin with conspiracy thinking. It begins with normal economic intuition. People are taught from childhood that the number on money equals what it is worth. A $1 note buys $1 of goods. A $10 bill buys $10 of goods. The relationship is direct and stable, but bullion coins break that rule. They carry a symbolic number disconnected from real value. And when buyers encounter this break for the first time, their mental model of money hesitates. They sense something inconsistent. Some interpret it as deception. Others interpret it as evidence that official currency has lost meaning. Both reactions grow from the same root, the face value illusion. The illusion becomes stronger because bullion coins look official. They carry national symbols, state seals, and sovereign authority. They resemble circulating currency, yet they behave like commodities. This hybrid identity creates confusion even among financially literate individuals. In the showroom, the buyer continued examining the coin. She asked whether anyone would actually spend it for $1. The dealer answered honestly. No rational holder would exchange an ounce of silver for its legal tender denomination. The metal alone was worth far more. This answer solved the pricing question, but created a new one in her mind. If no one uses the face value, why does it exist at all? The answer lies in monetary law rather than market pricing. Sovereign bullion coins must carry denomination to qualify as legal tender. Legal tender status allows them to move across borders as currency rather than taxed goods. It allows governments to guarantee weight and purity. It anchors the coin within national monetary systems, even though its economic value floats with metal markets. But this legal logic is invisible to most buyers. They do not see regulatory classification. They see a mismatch between symbol and substance. This mismatch matters more today than in the past because modern consumers already live in a monetary environment where trust in currency stability has weakened. Inflation cycles, debt expansion, and shifting purchasing power have changed how people interpret money. Many individuals now suspect that official numbers may not reflect real value. When such individuals encounter bullion coins, the face value illusion confirms their suspicion. They interpret the small denomination not as legal formality, but as evidence of systemic misrepresentation. The coin becomes, in their perception, proof that currency units and real assets have diverged. This perception is not entirely irrational. It reflects a real economic phenomenon. Intrinsic assets and fiat currency do not move together over long periods. Precious metals can rise in purchasing power while currency loses it. When this divergence becomes large, symbolic denominations appear meaningless. However, misunderstanding the purpose of face value leads to incorrect conclusions about how bullion functions in markets. The showroom buyer's confusion illustrates this risk. She began assuming that sovereign coins were intentionally labeled to hide true worth. From there, she considered rejecting them entirely in favor of privately minted silver without denomination. Her decision was not based on metal content or liquidity characteristics. It was based on perceived messaging embedded in the number. This is how the face value illusion changes behavior. It shifts focus away from measurable properties, weight, purity recognition, and toward symbolic interpretation. Buyers begin selecting assets based on perceived honesty rather than economic function. Markets then inherit that bias. The distinction between sovereign bullion and private rounds becomes blurred by psychology rather than metallurgy. Both may contain identical silver weight. Both may trade near similar premiums. Yet the presence or absence of a small stamped number alters perceived legitimacy. Historically, this confusion did not exist in the same form. Circulating silver coins in earlier eras carried denominations that roughly aligned with their metal value. A silver dollar contained silver worth near $1 in purchasing power. The face value represented intrinsic worth. The symbol and the substance matched. Modern bullion coins emerged in a different monetary world. Governments could no longer circulate precious metal currency directly because metal prices fluctuated beyond fixed denominations. Instead, they created bullion coins whose value floated with markets while retaining legal tender status through nominal face value. The denomination became symbolic rather than economic. For experienced investors, this distinction is obvious. For new buyers, it is not. And because new buyers often enter precious metals during periods of economic uncertainty, their interpretation carries emotional weight. They approach silver seeking stability, independence, or protection from currency erosion. Encountering a coin whose printed value contradicts its price intensifies their sensitivity. The showroom buyer's reaction followed this pattern. Her initial interest in silver came from concerns about financial systems. The denomination mismatch reinforced those concerns. She began interpreting bullion not merely as metal, but as commentary on money itself. This transformation, from asset to symbol, is precisely why the face value illusion matters for markets. When investors treat bullion coins as statements about currency legitimacy rather than as commodities, purchasing decisions become ideological. Liquidity preferences shift. Product categories are accepted or rejected based on perceived narrative rather than functional characteristics. This distortion affects not only individual buyers, but also dealers and educators. Dealers must repeatedly explain why denomination does not equal value. Educators must separate legal structure from economic behavior. Yet each new buyer re-encounters the illusion as if for the first time. The persistence of this confusion reveals something fundamental. Modern societies no longer share a unified mental model of money. Some still view currency as stable reference. Others view it as temporary measure. Bullion coins sit between these interpretations, carrying official denomination, yet behaving independently of it. The coin therefore becomes a mirror reflecting monetary belief. To the experienced holder, the $1 stamp is administrative detail. To the skeptical buyer, it is contradiction. To the distrustful observer, it is confirmation. Back in the showroom, the buyer placed the coin on the counter. She had not yet decided whether to purchase it, but her perception had already shifted. She no longer saw simply an ounce of silver. She saw a monetary artifact, whose printed number could not be trusted to represent worth. This was the precise moment the face value illusion completed its work. It had transformed a straightforward commodity into a question about truth and pricing, honesty in systems, and meaning in currency. And once that transformation occurs, every subsequent choice, bullion versus 90% silver, coin versus round, sovereign versus private, becomes filtered through the same lens. The number on the coin did not change the metal, but it changed the buyer's interpretation of the metal. Markets are often influenced less by physical reality than by perceived signals. In bullion markets, face value is one such signal. It carries legal meaning but creates psychological distortion. Understanding this difference is essential for any investor or entrepreneur entering physical precious metals, because the greatest risk in bullion is rarely counterfeit metal or pricing volatility. It is misunderstanding what the symbols on money actually mean. He did not realize the difference would matter until the moment he needed to explain it. The buyer had already rejected the sovereign bullion coin. The small face value stamped on its surface had unsettled her. She placed it aside and asked a new question, one that sounded simple but carried deeper implications. "Do you have older silver, the kind people used to use?" The dealer understood immediately what she meant. He reached beneath the counter and brought out a small tray. Inside were worn coins, dimes, quarters, and half dollars, minted decades earlier. Their edges were softened by time, Their designs were familiar. They looked less like investments and more like objects that had lived in pockets, purses, and cash drawers. These were 90% silver coins, often called constitutional silver. They had once circulated as ordinary money. The buyer's posture changed when she saw them. She leaned closer. She picked up a coin and turned it slowly in her fingers. There was no large denomination mismatch here. A dime still looked like a dime. A quarter still looked like a quarter. The numbers printed on them felt believable. To her, these coins appeared honest. This reaction happens often, though few recognize its significance. Modern bullion coins carry official authority but unfamiliar symbolism. Old circulating silver carries worn familiarity but reduced clarity. Between them lies one of the most misunderstood structural differences in precious metals. Recognition and trust do not always follow certification. The dealer began explaining the composition. These coins were 90% silver and 10% copper. Their silver content was fixed by historical minting standards. Each denomination contained a known fraction of an ounce. Experienced buyers understood the conversion instantly. A dollar face value of these coins equaled roughly 0.715 ounces of pure silver. But the buyer did not think in ounces. She thought in appearance. She asked whether people would accept these coins more easily than modern bullion. The dealer paused before answering. The question touched a deeper layer of market behavior, transactional recognition. In formal markets, bullion coins dominate. Their purity is explicit, their weight standardized, their origin certified by sovereign mint. Dealers worldwide recognize them immediately. They move through global bullion channels with minimal verification. But outside formal markets, in private exchange, small trade, or informal barter, the pattern can change. People trust what they recognize. An old silver quarter looks like money. It once functioned as money. Its design appears authentic even to those unfamiliar with metal markets. A modern bullion coin, though purer and more valuable, may look foreign or collectible to an untrained observer. This difference creates a subtle divide between bullion silver and 90% silver. Institutional trust versus cultural familiarity. The buyer sensed this divide intuitively. She did not use those terms, but her questions moved in that direction. She asked whether older coins were easier to trade in person. The dealer explained that divisibility often favored 90% silver. Smaller units allowed flexible exchange. A single bullion coin carried high value in one piece. Multiple small coins allowed incremental transactions. He described it as denomination adaptability. Large value concentrated in a single object can create friction. In constrained exchange environments, breaking value into usable portions becomes essential. Historically, circulating silver coinage solved this by design. Dimes, quarters, and halves created natural trade increments. Bullion coins, by contrast, prioritized purity and investment weight. The buyer listened carefully. Her interest in silver was not academic. She wanted assets she could hold, store, and potentially use. She imagined scenarios where formal currency systems might be stressed. In those scenarios, she believed familiarity would matter more than certification. Her reasoning reflected a common psychological shift among new precious metal entrants. They evaluate assets through imagined crisis usability rather than market liquidity. Yet this assumption contains its own risks. The dealer explained that while 90% silver feels familiar, its silver content is not obvious to the untrained eye. The coins do not state purity. They do not display weight. Their value must be calculated or trusted. Inexperienced traders may misprice them. Some may not recognize their metal content at all. Bullion coins solve this problem directly. Their purity and weight are explicit. They communicate value to knowledgeable markets instantly. They reduce verification friction among dealers and investors. Thus, the two silver categories reverse strengths depending on context. Bullion, high institutional recognition, lower divisibility. 90% silver, high cultural familiarity, lower intrinsic clarity. This inversion rarely appears in simplified discussions of precious metals. Most narratives treat silver as a single asset class, but within physical silver, form determines behavior. The same metal, shaped differently, moves through markets differently. The buyer continued examining the tray. She separated a few coins into her palm. Their surfaces were worn smooth from decades of circulation. They felt less like investments and more like survivors of another monetary era. She asked how their value was determined. The dealer explained pricing by face value multiples. Dealers typically quoted 90% silver by multiplying total face value by a silver conversion factor tied to spot price. The method differed from bullion pricing, which tracked ounces directly. This pricing structure revealed another distinction. 90% silver retains historical monetary language even after metal markets replaced it. Buyers think in dollars of coin face value, not ounces of metal. Bullion buyers think in ounces, not denomination. Two measurement systems coexist within the same asset. This coexistence reinforces the perception that 90% silver belongs to an older, more tangible monetary world. It once circulated, it once purchased goods directly, it once aligned denomination and intrinsic value. Even after removal from circulation, that memory persists in design and language. Bullion coins, by contrast, never circulated as everyday currency. They were created as investment instruments from the beginning. Their denomination is symbolic, not functional. Their economic identity has always been tied to metal markets, not retail exchange. The buyer sensed this difference without articulating it. She described 90% silver as real money from before. The phrase carried emotional meaning rather than technical accuracy, but it revealed how historical circulation continues to shape perception long after monetary systems change. Perception influences liquidity. In formal resale channels, bullion coins often command stronger recognition and tighter spreads. Dealers know exactly what they are buying. Global markets accept them instantly. In contrast, large quantities of mixed 90% silver may require sorting, counting, and verification. Transaction speed can slow, yet in small informal exchanges, the pattern can invert. A familiar quarter may be easier to accept than an unfamiliar bullion coin whose denomination appears contradictory. The symbolic history of 90% silver lowers psychological resistance. Thus, liquidity is not universal. It depends on context, knowledge, and scale. The buyer asked whether one type was safer than the other. The dealer answered carefully, safety depends on purpose. Bullion maximizes purity, certainty, and global recognition. 90% silver maximizes divisibility and cultural acceptance. Neither dominates universally. This balanced explanation contrasted sharply with online narratives that promote one form as superior. In reality, each silver category evolved to serve different monetary layers. Bullion belongs to investment markets. Circulating silver belonged to transactional economies. Their modern roles still echo those origins. The buyer's decision began forming as she compared the two trays. She imagined holding bullion coins, larger, brighter, heavier in single pieces. She imagined holding multiple worn quarters, smaller, divisible, familiar in shape. Her choice was not yet about price or purity. It was about function under uncertainty. This moment captures the core structural difference between bullion and 90% silver. They represent different philosophies of trust. Bullion trusts institutions, mints, certification, standardized weight. 90% silver trusts history, circulation, familiarity, inherited recognition. Both forms contain the same metal, but they signal value differently. Markets respond to signals as much as to substance. The buyer's hesitation between trays illustrated how physical format transmits meaning. A sovereign bullion coin communicates official validation. A worn circulating coin communicates lived monetary experience. Neither signal is false, but each appeals to different assumptions about how value is recognized. As she placed several 90% coins back into the tray, the buyer paused. She asked the dealer one final question before deciding. If someone didn't know silver, which would they trust faster? The dealer did not answer immediately. The question cut through metallurgy, pricing, and policy. It went directly to behavioral economics, how humans interpret objects as money. His eventual reply was simple. They trust what they recognize until they learn something better. That sentence revealed the central tension between bullion and 90% silver. Recognition begins with familiarity, but lasting trust often shifts toward clarity. Old coins feel understandable at first glance. Bullion coins reveal precision after explanation. The buyer now faced a choice between intuitive comfort and explicit certainty. Both contained silver, both preserved value, but they operated through different trust pathways. This distinction, subtle yet powerful, would shape her decision. And it illustrates why misunderstanding the structural roles of bullion and 90% silver leads investors to choose forms mismatched to their intended use. Because in precious metals, as in money itself, the shape of value determines how value moves. He did not think about silver in ounces. He thought about it in moments. Moments when systems slow, moments when payment networks stall, moments when access depends not on accounts, but on what a person physically holds. The buyer in the showroom had already seen two versions of silver. Modern bullion, precise, certified, high purity. Old circulating coins, familiar, divisible, historically trusted. But neither category answered the question now forming in her mind. Not what is silver worth, but how does silver actually work? When conditions change, she asked the dealer something different this time. If everything was normal, I know bullion works, but if things weren't normal, which kind actually works better? The room grew quieter. This question moved beyond classification. It moved into function under stress. The dealer did not answer immediately because the answer required separating two ideas most buyers merge: investment efficiency and crisis utility. Investment efficiency is simple. Maximize metal per dollar, minimize premium, store value in the most compact form. By this logic, large bullion units dominate. 10-ounce bars, kilograms, even larger formats. They carry the lowest cost per ounce and concentrate purchasing power densely. For long-term storage and eventual resale into formal markets, efficiency wins. But crisis utility follows a different equation. Crisis utility measures how easily value can move between people when systems are strained. It is not about total wealth preserved. It is about whether that wealth can translate into goods, services, or cooperation at small scale. This distinction is rarely discussed openly. Yet it determines whether physical silver behaves as stored value or usable value. The dealer reached beneath the counter again and placed a single large silver bar on the surface. It was heavy, rectangular, industrial in appearance. It represented significant purchasing power in one object. "Imagine," he said calmly, "that this is all the silver you have." The buyer nodded. "Now imagine you need something small," he continued. "Fuel, food, repair, help, something worth a fraction of this." He tapped the bar gently. "How do you use this without losing value?" The buyer understood instantly. A large concentration of value creates denomination mismatch. The same problem exists with currency. High denomination notes become impractical in constrained exchange. If the smallest usable unit is too large, transactions fail or value leaks. Either the holder overpays or cannot transact at all. Economies historically solve this through layered denominations, large units for storage, small units for trade. Silver followed the same logic for centuries. Circulating coinage existed precisely to divide metal wealth into usable portions. Modern bullion reversed this hierarchy. It optimized storage and investment, not exchange. The buyer stared at the bar. She imagined carrying it, protecting it, presenting it in negotiation. The image felt unrealistic, not because of weight, but because of scale. It contained too much value to move fluidly between ordinary transactions. Crisis utility depends on divisible value. The dealer replaced the bar with a handful of small 90% silver coins. Their total silver content was lower. Their combined value was smaller, but their functional flexibility increased dramatically. "Now imagine the same situation," he said. "You need something modest. You have this." He spread the coins across the counter. The difference was immediate. Multiple units allow proportional exchange. Value can be calibrated to need. This is the hidden advantage of fractional silver. Denomination adaptability. It allows stored wealth to fragment without conversion infrastructure. No cutting, weighing, or recalculating required. Each coin becomes a self-contained trade unit. Bullion, by contrast, assumes intact resale. It is designed to move whole, not divide. The buyer now understood the structural trade-off. Large bullion maximizes investment efficiency. Fractional silver maximizes transactional flexibility. Neither dominates universally. Each serves a different economic layer. But crisis thinking changes priorities. When individuals imagine disruption, they subconsciously prioritize usability over efficiency. They want assets that can translate directly into action without intermediaries. This psychological shift explains why many first-time buyers gravitate towards smaller silver forms, even when premiums are higher. They are purchasing optionality, not just metal. Optionality means the ability to act across uncertain scenarios. The dealer introduced a third element, liquidity speed. In stable markets, liquidity depends on dealers and pricing systems. Bullion coins and bars trade quickly because infrastructure exists. In stressed environments, liquidity may depend on human recognition and trust. Recognition favors familiar forms. Divisibility favors small units. Clarity favors known content. No single silver format maximizes all three simultaneously. The buyer asked whether this meant bullion was inferior. The dealer shook his head. Bullion remains the most efficient long-term store of silver wealth. It compresses value into minimal space and cost. For investors planning eventual conversion back into currency markets, bullion often performs best. But crisis utility and investment efficiency diverge under pressure. Assets optimized for storage may not optimize for use. Assets optimized for use may sacrifice storage efficiency. This divergence mirrors broader monetary history. Gold served high-value storage and settlement. Silver served everyday exchange. Copper served small transactions. Each metal aligned with denomination scale. Each solved a different economic layer. Modern bullion collapses these layers into investment logic alone. But when individuals consider contingency scenarios, the old hierarchy reappears psychologically. They seek divisible metal, not just dense metal. The buyer now saw the deeper pattern. Her earlier attraction to 90% silver was not nostalgia, it was functional instinct. Circulating coins once existed precisely because societies required divisible intrinsic money. That function never disappeared. It only became less visible. She asked about premiums again. Fractional silver costs more per ounce because manufacturing, packaging, and handling increase cost. Investment efficiency decreases, yet crisis utility increases. This trade-off cannot be eliminated. It must be chosen. The dealer explained that experienced holders often maintain layered silver portfolios, large units for stored wealth, medium units for liquidity, small units for divisibility. Each layer addresses a different use horizon. But new buyers rarely think in layers. They seek a single optimal form. The face value illusion from earlier had already disrupted the buyer's perception of bullion coins. Now the denomination mismatch of large bars disrupted her perception of investment efficiency. She began seeing silver not as one product, but as multiple economic tools. The dealer then introduced a thought experiment. Imagine, he said, that markets remain stable for 10 years. You sell everything back through dealers. In that scenario, large bullion likely outperforms. Lower premiums, faster resale, standardized weight. Now imagine, he continued, that access becomes limited for a period, not collapse, just friction. Fewer dealers, slower payments, less certainty. In that scenario, divisibility and recognition rise in importance. Fractional silver gains functional advantage. He emphasized that neither scenario is certain. Investors should not buy silver based on predicted disruption. But misunderstanding functional differences leads to mismatched holdings. Crisis utility is about preparedness, not prediction. The buyer appreciated the distinction. She did not want to assume instability, but she wanted assets resilient across conditions. Resilience means maintaining usefulness, even if environments shift. Bullion preserves value efficiently. Fractional silver preserves usability flexibly. The dealer placed both trays side by side. Bullion coins on one side, 90% coins on the other. The buyer observed them in silence. Each represented silver. Each preserved purchasing power. But each carried different economic behavior. Her decision now approached clarity. Not because one was superior, but because each served a different purpose. This realization marks the turning point in most physical silver journeys. Investors move from thinking in ounces to thinking in functions. They stop asking which silver is best and begin asking which silver works best for their intended role. The distinction seems technical, but it is foundational, because value stored and value usable are not identical, and in metals, form determines which one dominates. The buyer reached toward the smaller coins again. She did not yet finalize the choice, but her reasoning had shifted permanently. She now evaluated silver through the lens of economic function rather than surface price. That shift, from efficiency to utility, reveals why bullion and 90% silver coexist in markets despite identical metal content. They solve different problems, and misunderstanding that difference leads to portfolios optimized for the wrong conditions. He watched her weigh the coins in her palm. He could see the calculation forming. She was no longer asking what silver costs. She was asking what silver does. She thought she was choosing between two types of silver, but by the time she reached the final decision, the choice no longer felt like metal at all. It felt like a decision about trust. The trays were still on the counter. Bullion coins on one side, bright, precise, sovereign. Old 90% coins on the other, worn, divisible, familiar. The dealer had explained purity, liquidity, divisibility, premiums, resale behavior. Every technical difference was now clear. Yet the buyer remained undecided, because the real question had shifted again. Not which silver works, but which system she believed in. This is the quiet force behind face value confusion. It does not stop at pricing misunderstanding. It reaches deeper into how individuals interpret authority, currency, and value itself. The denomination stamped on bullion coins is legally meaningless for market price, but psychologically powerful for belief. She picked up a bullion coin once more. The tiny face value still sat near the edge, unchanged. $1, a number that no longer represented reality. A number required by law, yet detached from purchasing power. She asked the dealer something she had not asked before. Why keep the number if everyone knows it isn't real? The question did not concern silver anymore. It concerned money. The dealer answered carefully. The denomination anchors the coin inside sovereign monetary systems. Without it, the coin becomes generic metal. With it, the coin becomes legal tender, recognized by governments, transportable across jurisdictions, standardized in issuance. The number is symbolic classification, not valuation. But symbolism carries consequences. When the public sees official money marked with numbers that clearly do not represent purchasing power, it reveals a deeper monetary truth. Currency units no longer measure intrinsic value. They measure policy-defined value. Precious metals expose that difference visibly. Bullion coins therefore act as silent indicators of monetary divergence. Their face value remains fixed while their metal value floats. The wider the gap becomes, the more irrational the denomination appears. And the more irrational it appears, the more observers question currency itself. The buyer sensed this intuitively. The $1 stamp on an ounce of silver felt like evidence that official numbers can detach from reality. She began interpreting bullion coins not merely as assets, but as statements about the credibility of money. This interpretation is common in periods of monetary uncertainty. And when purchasing power erodes, individuals search for stable reference points. Tangible assets become anchors. When those assets carry symbolic denominations that contradict their worth, the contradiction reinforces distrust toward abstract currency systems. Thus, face value confusion is not only about silver, it is about belief in money. The dealer explained that sovereign bullion coins were never meant to circulate at their face value. Their denomination exists to define legal status, not trade price. But in modern perception, that distinction blurs. People expect numbers on money to represent value. When they do not, credibility fractures. She then looked at the 90% coins again. Their denominations once matched intrinsic worth. A silver quarter once held roughly a quarter's purchasing power in metal. Symbol and substance aligned. That alignment no longer exists, but historical memory persists. Old coins feel honest because they once were. Bullion coins feel symbolic because they always were. This difference reveals a deeper transition in monetary systems. Societies moved from intrinsic money to fiat money, from metal-defined value to policy-defined value. Bullion coins exist at the boundary between these eras. They contain intrinsic metal but carry fiat denomination. They are hybrids of two monetary worlds. Hybrids create ambiguity. Ambiguity creates interpretation. Interpretation shapes trust. The buyer's hesitation reflected this hybrid tension. Bullion coins represented institutional authority but symbolic denomination. 90% coins represented historical money but uncertain content clarity. Each form carried strengths and weaknesses tied to different trust models. She realized she was not choosing between metals. She was choosing between signals. Bullion signals, sovereign certification. 90% silver signals, monetary history. Both signals point to value, but through different narratives. Markets often function through narratives as much as mechanics. Investors rarely admit this openly, but asset choice frequently reflects belief about systems. Gold and silver historically rise during periods when fiat confidence weakens, not because metals change, but because trust shifts. Face value confusion accelerates that shift. It makes the divergence between symbolic currency and intrinsic asset visible in one object. A coin stamped $1, yet priced $30, exposes monetary abstraction in tangible form. The buyer asked the final question quietly. If money can show a number that isn't real, how do you know what's real? The dealer did not answer immediately. The question moved beyond bullion into philosophy. Yet the showroom context gave it practical meaning. Investors constantly evaluate representations of value. Currency, assets, claims, commodities. Each carries symbols. Each requires trust. He answered slowly. You look at what doesn't change when systems change. The statement hung in the air. Precious metals historically serve that role. They persist across currencies, governments, and eras. Their value is not fixed, but recognized repeatedly. Bullion coins and 90% coins both share this persistence. Their differences lie in how they communicate value, not whether they hold it. The buyer now understood the full structure. Face value confusion had led her through layers of economic perception. First, pricing mismatch, then asset form differences. Now, monetary belief itself. This progression explains why many individuals enter precious metals during periods of uncertainty. They are not merely buying commodities. They are seeking anchors independent of policy-defined numbers. Bullion coins, despite symbolic denomination, still anchor value through metal content. 90% coins anchor value through historical continuity. Both resist currency abstraction in different ways. The buyer's final decision emerged from this understanding. She selected a combination rather than a single form. Some bullion coins for certified purity and institutional recognition. Some 90% coins for divisibility and historical familiarity. Her reasoning was no longer driven by suspicion of face value. It was driven by layered trust. She recognized that systems may fluctuate, but recognition pathways differ. Some counterparties trust sovereign marks. Others trust familiar circulation, holding both reduced dependency on one narrative. This layered approach reflects mature asset thinking. It acknowledges that trust is not uniform across environments. Different contexts validate different signals. Resilient portfolios incorporate multiple recognition channels. The dealer packed her purchase carefully. The trays emptied slightly. The showroom returned to quiet. Yet the encounter revealed a broader truth about modern money. Face value confusion persists because currency and intrinsic value diverged. Bullion coins expose that divergence visibly. Observers interpret it according to their trust assumptions. Some see legal structure. Others see contradiction. Others see confirmation of systemic fragility. But the coin itself does not change. Only interpretation does. This distinction matters for investors, entrepreneurs, and decision-makers entering physical metals. Misunderstanding face value leads to flawed conclusions about bullion legitimacy. Understanding it reveals bullion's hybrid role. legal tender classification paired with intrinsic commodity value. The buyer left the showroom holding silver that looked different but shared substance. She no longer viewed denomination as deception. She understood it as symbolic overlay. The metal beneath remained constant regardless of number. As the door closed behind her, the dealer returned the remaining coins to their cases. The $1 stamp still sat on the bullion surface, unchanged, small, almost irrelevant to weight or purity. Yet that tiny number had guided an entire journey, from confusion to comprehension, from suspicion to structure, from symbol to substance. It revealed not only how silver works, but how modern money is perceived when numbers and reality no longer align. And that alignment, or its absence, is the silent force shaping trust in every market where value must be believed before it is exchanged.